Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Compugen's second quarter 2021 results conference call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. An audio webcast of this call is available in the investor section of Compugen's website, www.cgen.com. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded. I would now like to introduce Yvonne Naughton, Head of Investor Relations and Corporate Communications.
Thank you, operator, and thank you for joining us on the call today. Joining me to present prepared remarks are Anat Cohen-Diag, President and CEO, and Ari Krashen, CFO and COO. For the Q&A session, we will also be joined by Henry Adewoye, CMO, and Eran Ophir, Vice President, Research and Drug Discovery. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that during this call, the company may make projections or forward-looking statements regarding future events or business outlook, our development efforts and their outcome, our discovery platform, anticipated progress, results, and timelines for our programs, financial and accounting related matters, as well as statements regarding our cash position. Such statements represent only the company's current beliefs, expectations, and assumptions, while actual results, performance, or achievements of the company may differ materially. These statements involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties, and we refer you to our SEC filings for more details on these risks, including the company's most recent report on Form 20-F filed on February 25, 2021. The company undertakes no obligation to update projections or forward-looking statements in the future. With that, I will turn the call over to Anat.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second quarter 2021 update. Our continued progress through 2021 has been strong, with steady execution, solidifying our leading position in the DNAM axis and differentiating us in the TIGIT space as the only company targeting in a clinical setting PVRIG, TIGIT, and PD-1 as part of our three-pathway hypothesis. On today's call, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to remind you of our strategy, provide perspectives on our most recent data, our views on important developments in the field, and what's to come for the remainder of 2021. We believe that the foundation that underlies our success at Compugen is our science and our people. We were the first to identify PVRIG and ILDR2 as novel checkpoints, and we published on TIGIT the same year as Genentech. Both PVRIG and TIGIT are key parallel and complementary inhibitory pathways in the DNAM axis, which also intersect with the well-established PD-1 pathway. While TIGIT and PVRIG pathways share similarities, we observed key differences between the two with respect to their expression pattern and their ligand expression pattern on immune cells and tumor types. Furthermore, our recent data shows that PVRIG is expressed similarly to PD-1 and TIGIT in stem cell-like memory and exhausted T cells, an important cell population with a potential role in mediating anti-tumor effects. However, recently, Eran Ophir, our VP of Research and Drug Discovery, presented scientific data showing that PVRIG has a more dominant expression pattern on early differentiated stem-like memory T cells than TIGIT and PD-1, further pointing to the possibility that PVRIG may act differently. We believe that the future of immuno-oncology will be driven by combination approaches. Research from Compugen suggests that the PVRIG, TIGIT, and PD-1 pathways have different dominance in different tumor types and patients, implying that to induce effective immune anti-tumor responses, certain patient populations may require the blockade of different combinations of these three pathways. To test this hypothesis, Compugen has established a biomarker and biology-informed clinical program which aims to evaluate different combinations of these axis members across tumor types. We're focused on maintaining our first-mover advantage in the clinic as the only company with monotherapy, doublet, and triplet combination clinical studies evaluating the DNAM axis players, PVRIG and TIGIT, as well as PD-1. We believe these programs, anchored by our first-in-class anti-PVRIG antibody COM701, uniquely position Compugen with innovative and potential first-to-market doublet and triplet therapies. Our most recent data from the phase 1 dose escalation and expansion cohort of COM701 as monotherapy and in combination with nivolumab presented at ASCO this year are important for several reasons. These preliminary data show durable responses and disease control in patients who exhausted all prior treatment options, which may have meaningful effect. Notably, these responses were in tumor types typically not responding to immune checkpoint inhibitors. COM701, in combination with nivolumab, resulted in a disease control rate of 67%. This included a complete response in a patient with anal squamous cell carcinoma who had prior treatment with nivolumab, and a partial response in a patient with microsatellite stable colorectal cancer. These are tumor types typically unlikely to respond to checkpoint inhibitors, and at the time of reporting, we saw responses up to and beyond 1 year. Moreover, our potential differentiation comes through the addition of an anti-TIGIT antibody to this doublet regimen in our ongoing triplet combination study and combining anti-PVRIG with anti-TIGIT in our newly initiated anti-PD-1 independent study. These data are also important as they demonstrate signals of anti-tumor activity in a COM701 monotherapy setting in patients who have exhausted all available standard therapies and in tumor types typically not responding to immune checkpoint inhibitors. COM701 resulted in a disease control rate of 47%, including 1 partial response. It is also important to note that COM701 was well tolerated with no DLTs with monotherapy or in combination with nivolumab. This is a critical component of our ability to move forward with our differentiated combination approach. These preliminary data are also important as they included our first initial pharmacodynamic biomarker data, which indicated treatment with COM701 leads to immune activation. We also showed that anti-tumor activity was observed in selected PD-1 low PVRL2 positive patients, suggesting COM701 treatment may drive anti-tumor immunity even in patients with less inflamed tumor microenvironment. I will come back to this data and a broader biomarker strategy later in the call. Compugen execution in the clinic has been impressive. In a short time, we have gone from our first clinical launch and data presentation to a comprehensive clinical program with the opportunity to truly differentiate us in the DNAM and TIGIT space, including the ongoing cohort expansion of COM701 in combination with nivolumab, the triplet study of COM701 with nivolumab and Bristol Myers Squibb's TIGIT inhibitor, for which we just announced initiation of the cohort expansion study. The dose escalation of COM902, our wholly owned TIGIT inhibitor, and the recently initiated doublet study of COM902 and COM701, initially evaluating the safety and tolerability of the combination at both of the recommended doses for expansion in patients who have exhausted all available standard of care therapies, i.e. all comers. Once this is completed, an expansion cohort of both study drugs will be initiated in patients with PD-1 refractory or relapsed non-small cell lung cancer and head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, as well as colorectal cancer, microsatellite colorectal cancer. Having completed the dose escalation of the triplet study and initiated the triplet cohort expansion study, we continue to evaluate strategies to maintain our fast execution and first mover advantage. We are considering removing randomization from the ovarian arm of the triplet study, as historical data for nivolumab in ovarian cancer already exist, and we know these patients have low response rate to nivolumab. In addition, we are considering adding an inflamed indication, possibly head and neck cancer, to broadly assess the full blockade of this axis in a tumor type that, unlike most of the other tumor types we evaluate, has an inflamed histology but still presents a low response rate to immunotherapies. And finally, our plan for the triplet includes starting the basket study when we have additional data aiming to support the link between PVRL2 expression and treatment response. Coming back to our biomarker strategy, on which we receive a lot of questions, I thought I would take this opportunity to summarize our approach. Firstly, we use biomarkers to select the tumor types for inclusion in our cohort of expansion studies. This was driven by our computational discovery prediction and validated in the lab on DNAM axis members expression in tumor samples, along with our initial clinical results from the dose escalation studies of COM701. Our focus in the various expansion cohort studies we initiated is on tumor types with a high level of both PVRIG and PVRL2, and the tumor types in which we saw initial signals of antitumor activity in the dose escalation studies. Such antitumor activity further supports our biomarker-informed approach and predictive discovery capabilities. The second part of our biomarker strategy is the identification of biomarkers for future patient selection. To achieve this goal, we are currently evaluating the correlation between the expression of the PVRIG pathway with clinical response, as well as other exploratory biomarker identification approaches. This work is being done in our ongoing cohort expansion studies in which tumor biopsies are collected pre and on treatment. And thirdly, we have a pharmacodynamic biomarker approach where we measure immune modulation induced by COM701 and combinations in peripheral and tumor patient samples obtained before and during treatment, as mentioned earlier. Our first presentation of our preliminary biomarker results at ASCO provided initial clinical evidence for the potential immune-mediated mechanism of action with COM701. After one treatment cycle, patients with COM701 monotherapy showed a trend of increased proliferation of effector memory CD8+ T cells. This is an important cell population, particularly given its high expression of PVRIG and role in driving antitumor activity. In addition, we saw a significant proliferation of NKT cells, which also plays a role in antitumor activity. From a cytokine perspective, levels of interferon gamma, a cytokine that plays a key role in antitumor activity, were upregulated following combination treatment of COM701 plus nivolumab. Interestingly, these results showed a dose-response trend with increasing doses of COM701 and fixed doses of nivolumab, suggesting that the observed increase in cytokines is derived from the combination regimen and not nivolumab alone. We were excited to present a case study at ASCO, which included archival biopsy data from a patient with platinum-resistant MSS primary peritoneal cancer. This patient, with a confirmed PR, who was on treatment for 18 months, was PD-L1 negative prior to treatment, with PVRL2 expression on both tumor and endothelial cells and an immune desert phenotype. Peripheral blood assessment in this patient showed immune activation as measured by immune cell proliferation and interferon gamma induction prior to tumor shrinkage. This biopsy and peripheral blood biomarker case study, together with our recent finding of PVRIG expression profile on stem cell-like memory T cells and its ligand on dendritic cells, suggest a potential mechanism of action of COM701 in driving tumor shrinkage, likely through immune activation in a patient with an immune desert, non-inflamed tumor microenvironment. These immune desert, non-inflamed patients are those who are typically considered least likely to respond to checkpoint inhibitors, and were encouraged by these initial results, which provide the first translational indication that targeting the DNAM axis may expand the reach of immunotherapy to patients who typically do not benefit from these treatments. Our steady execution over the past year has propelled us to a unique first-mover advantage as the only company with wholly owned clinical stage assets for both PVRIG and TIGIT. Recent developments in the field are providing important validation of our three-way hypothesis, with considerable interest growing in pursuing similar approaches in evaluating the dual and triple blockade of DNAM axis members, PVRIG and TIGIT, along with PD-1. We believe the growing interest in the field endorses our overall strategy from target discovery and validation through to our clinical strategy. And while others are looking to advance candidates targeting PVRIG into clinical studies, we remain ahead with clinical evaluation of monotherapy, dual, and triple combination regimens already in progress with COM701. Part of the growing interest in the DNAM axis includes a debate regarding the role of the Fc domain and its relevance for antitumor activity for immune checkpoint inhibitors in general and TIGIT antibodies specifically. And while the debate for TIGIT antibodies is ongoing, which was a point of discussion at the recent SITC symposium on TIGIT, the consensus is that it is unclear if preclinical results from mice or in vitro studies support Fc-active TIGIT antibodies will translate to the clinic. COM701 and COM902 were both purposely designed by Compugen to have reduced Fc effector function, as we believe this best positions us for success in the clinic. Antibodies with Fc effector function carry the risk of depleting CD8 plus T cells, which are crucial for driving antitumor activity in the solid tumor setting. Our strategy is to avoid the risk of depleting this important cell population, and our growing data support this decision with preliminary activity in the clinic with COM701. In addition, the recent developments in the field indicating promising phase 2 randomized descriptive data with an Fc-silent anti-TIGIT are in line with our Fc-reduced function approach. So far, 2021 has been a year of execution for Compugen, and we plan to continue this execution through the second half of the year, with several milestones still expected to come. Among these milestones will be preliminary data from our leading phase 1-2 triple combination study evaluating the safety, tolerability, and preliminary antitumor activity of COM701 in combination with Bristol-Myers Squibb TIGIT antibody and nivolumab. We remain on track to report initial data from the study in the fourth quarter of the year, which tests our triple blockade hypothesis that blocking the three intersecting PVRIG, TIGIT, and PD-1 pathways has the potential to synergistically enhance antitumor immune responses in selected patient populations not responsive or refractory to PD-1 blockade. This is a key differentiator for Compugen in the competitive TIGIT space. Our progress with the triple combination study continues with the recently announced initiation of the expansion cohort of the study. Moving next to COM902. The COM902 monotherapy dose escalation study is important as it enables us to select a dose to independently evaluate multiple combination approaches with COM902 in the clinic. We expect to provide initial data from the COM902 dose escalation in the fourth quarter of this year. We also strengthened our track record of executing in the clinic with the on-schedule initiation of our clinical study of COM902 in combination with COM701. This study, as the first clinical evaluation of the dual blockade of PVRIG and TIGIT, is again a key differentiator for Compugen in the competitive TIGIT space. As you know, we also have an ongoing collaboration with Bayer, and we are pleased with their commitment in advancing our ILDR2 program. Like PVRIG, ILDR2 was first discovered by Compugen. Bayer have full responsibility for development of bapotilumab, which is a novel, first-in-class anti-ILDR2 monoclonal antibody. We're pleased to be able to say that enrollment is accelerating in the phase 1 cohort expansion study, which is focused on treating patients with first-line IO-naive head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. We look forward to sharing additional updates on the progress of this collaboration in the future, subject to Bayer's communication policy. We're proud of our remarkable progress, excited for what's to come, and remain committed to pioneering the science and clinical studies that have the potential to expand the reach of immunotherapies to patient populations who are unresponsive or refractory to current treatments. Before turning the call over to Ari, I would like to thank the team at Compugen, our partners, investigators, shareholders, and patients. I'm incredibly proud of their ongoing commitment and dedication, which has enabled our impressive execution. And with that, I will turn the call over to Ari to review the financials.
Thank you, Anat. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Our financial results for the second quarter of 2021, released this morning, continue to show our strong financial position as we execute across our growing clinical programs. Research and development expenses for the second quarter of 2021 were $6.8 million compared with $4.4 million for the same period in 2020. The increase in expenses reflects the continued execution and expansion of the various clinical trials phase 1 programs. Net loss for the second quarter of 2021 was $9.5 million or 11 cents per basic and diluted share, compared with a net loss of $6.2 million or 8 cents per basic and diluted share for the same period in 2020. As of June 30th, 2021, we had approximately $111 million in cash and cash-related accounts, compared with approximately $119 million as of March 31st, 2021. The company has no debt. As a reminder, we expect our gross cash expenditures for 2021 to be in the range between $40 to $42 million, without taking into consideration any potential cash inflows for the company from existing and new collaborations. Thank you, and with that, we will now open the call for questions.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star 1. If you wish to decline from the polling process, please press star 2. If you are using speaker equipment, kindly lift the handset before pressing the numbers. Please stand by while we poll for your questions. The first question is from Mark Breitenbach of Oppenheimer. Please go ahead.
Hey, thanks for taking the questions and congrats on the progress. So let me maybe start with a kind of sciencey one. We certainly appreciated Eran's presentation showing the fraction of TCF7 positive cells is important for response to checkpoint therapy, and that there's expression of PVRIG in stem-like T cells. I guess I'm wondering if you see TCF7 as a potential biomarker for patient selection. Would you expect there to be many patients in your phase 1 dose escalation trials who still have stem-like T cells? And is that the kind of thing that can be simply monitored from peripheral blood without needing biopsies?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I think it's an interesting notion which is not relevant only to PVRIG, but to the field at all, the expression of TCF1. I think it might be a challenging biomarker in terms of its prevalence and expression in TME. But we are looking, in addition to the obvious suspects in DNAM pathway, etc., we're looking quite broad in terms of exploratory biomarker identification. Obviously, TCF7 is one of them. And peripheral blood, I'm not sure it's correlated enough, the presence of these cells in blood compared to tumor.
Okay, fair enough. And just in terms of what we should be expecting as far as patient numbers for the upcoming readouts from the triple combination dose escalation study and COM902 monotherapy dose escalation study, and also might we see additional kind of translational biomarker data compared to archival biopsies for any of these patients, or will the focus really be more on safety and efficacy in the fourth quarter?
So I'll let Henry relate to it, but just for the translational data, we're accumulating data. We're working on translational data generation from our studies. When we will have the data, we'll present. Not sure that this will be ready for the Q4, or maybe we'll have only very initial data. As for the expectations, I'll let Henry relate to it.
Yes, so it will be along the line. Mark, thank you very much for your question. It will be along the same lines of the subjects that we've previously enrolled in dose escalation. So an approximate range will be between the range of 15 to about 20 patients for the dose escalation.
And that's for both the triple combination and for COM902 as well?
Yeah, that is correct, Mark.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification, and thanks for taking the questions.
The next question is from Chris Howerton of Jefferies. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the questions. And, of course, congratulations on the progress and look forward to the end of the year here. So maybe just a couple questions from me. One is maybe just more of a theoretical question in terms of some of the checkpoint axes. Obviously, the DNAM axis is the focus for your team. But there's also been some, activity with VISTA and the associated macrophage lineage. So I guess, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how those may or may not synergize or work together. And then the second question I have is, I know, Anat, you were mentioning around the strategy and the hypothesis that you have around the FC domain of your antibodies. There was a recent update from Arcus, obviously a little scant on details, but, curious to hear your thoughts as to how that reads through to your programs. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. For your first question, not sure about VISTA specifically, but if you're talking about myeloid checkpoints in general, this is something we entered a few years ago. Yes, we do think that myeloid plays an important role in immune suppression in tumor microenvironment. And we have early programs on this in this front, and we are evaluating, of course, efficacy and combinations, and synergism with current pipeline assets, etc.
Okay.
And for the
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add for the FC domain question and the Arcus data. So obviously, we were not surprised to see this descriptive data, positive descriptive data. We will wait to to see the data itself. But remember that this is an approach that we were taking ourselves, and we believe in this approach. We selected an IgG4 purposely. So, it was encouraging for us to see it, but we were expecting it.
Yeah. Okay. And then maybe if I may, just one other quick question, with respect to kind of the tumor microenvironment that you were describing, like head and neck, where it was inflamed but not necessarily responding to immunotherapy. I guess what is the mechanistic hypothesis there in terms of specifically what the checkpoints are and how is it, inflamed yet no appreciable immune response to the actual tumor?
So we're moving in few fronts, evaluating few different hypotheses. As discussed in the script, where the expression of PVRIG and stem-like T cells, the expression of PVRL2 and dendritic cells, all of this makes us think that PVRIG may be a dominant checkpoint in terms of enhancing T cell priming, expansion, and thereby enabling targeting also patients which have less inflamed tumor microenvironment. And we presented in ASCO preliminary data to show that we see some early signs of anti-tumor activity in patients which have PD-L1 low, less inflamed tumor types. But obviously, every checkpoint should work better in a more inflamed tumor microenvironment because the T cells are already there. So you might need to push it a bit less to get efficacy. And tumors like head and neck and even other more inflamed might also have a potential for PVRIG in terms of enhancing and expanding the T cells which are already there, releasing another break that might be the one which is relevant if PD-1 alone is not itself, and head and neck and non-small cell lung and other hotter indication have a quite dominant expression of the pathway, PVRL2 and others. So I think we're testing in a clinical strategy multiple indications which fits different or value hypotheses, all stemming from the same biology of PVRIG and PVRL2 and their role in T cell expansion.
Yeah. Okay. No, I get it. Okay, thank you very much, Arana, and appreciate taking the question.
The next question is from Rennie Benjamin of JMP Securities. Please go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks for taking the questions and congratulations on all the clinical progress. I guess just sticking with the TIGIT theme, we've seen some significant BD activity, most recently, I guess, with BMS and Agenus. And I just wanted to get your thoughts as to, I guess, how we should be thinking about your own BD discussions and your thoughts regarding the potential to partner, or is this something that you really want to keep, in-house? And sticking with the TIGIT theme, when I think about, I think, Annette, you had made some comments about how, the strategy with having a inactive or slightly less functioning FC effector prevents CD8 T cell depletion. I always thought about, the FC regions as mainly impacting NK cells. Is there, something that I'm missing there, or something you can, help educate me on in regards to T cells and FC receptors?
Sure. Thank you, Rennie. I'll relate to the business front, and then Aran can take the FC NK relationship. So first, COM902 was developed at Compugen in order to ensure that we extract the full potential of COM701. So we're still on this path, and we want to make sure that we remain competitive on this front and that we remain flexible, owning the two arms of this DNAM axis. And as you know, we just started recently the COM701, COM902 study. Having said that, we're obviously open to discuss collaborative arrangements. This should allow us to continue to extract the potential of COM701 and to generate some differentiation for our pipeline. So we're open to discuss collaborative arrangements pending it will allow us to keep what we need for our own pipeline.
about the
and then just
so about the role of FC. So there are a few assumptions to why preclinically people think that TIGIT is superior when it has FC binding. I would say maybe the leading one indeed relates in a way to enhancing NK activity. So when you use an antibody which have capability to bind FC receptors, you enhance few mechanisms that enhance, in the end of the day, depletion of the cells which carry the target, TIGIT in this case. NK activation is a major one, especially in mice. By the way, in human tumor microenvironment, you can see less NK than in mice, but there are also other mechanisms. And people, again, some claim that you can get the depletion of TIGIT-positive cells, and since TIGIT has high expression on regulatory T cells, this is desirable. However, TIGIT has also high and overlapping expression on the CD8 T cells, the same cells you want to unleash from the TIGIT inhibitory effect. And if you're going to deplete anything, you carry the risk also of depleting CD8 T cells in addition to Tregs. And that's why we and others chose to focus on a non-FC binder to avoid the risk of depletion of effector CD8 T cells due to enhancement of NK activity or other mechanisms of T cell depletion inside your microenvironment. Did this answer your question?
Yep, that does. Thanks for the clarification. I guess just as a follow-up, with 902, we're expecting the data from the monotherapy in the fourth quarter. And you've already started the combination study. What is the recommended dose for 902, or have you started at kind of the low end of the range when combining with 701 and are escalating?
Yeah, Remy, thank you very much for your question. Yes, we did start at the low end of the range for COM902 during this escalation. The disclosure will identify what the recommended dose for expansion for COM902 will be.
Sorry, Henry. I just want to make sure. So in the fourth quarter, we'll know what the recommended.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
Yes. So
okay.
the disclosure in the fourth quarter that Anat mentioned in our prepared remarks.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much for taking the questions.
The next question is from Asthika Goonewardene of Truist Securities. Please go ahead.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my questions. So, Anat, you mentioned about the cutoffs that you're using PVRL2 and PVRIG expression as selection criteria for some of the expansion cohorts. Can you tell us what was the level of expression you're looking for inclusion? And can you maybe just clarify for me, please, which studies you're going to be applying this inclusion criteria?
So we're still studying it. We're following samples. We're following patients' correlation to response. And this is exactly the goal of what we are trying to do, to define in this stage retrospectively which is the expression level cutoff, which could be percentages of PVRIG in the tumor microenvironment. It could be PVRL2 on tumor cells, on myeloid cells, as others have shown for other biomarkers. So we're looking at all of it, correlating to response, and of course looking for the right cutoff. So this is yet to be defined, and it will be defined based on data and correlations.
Got it. And so I think at our last call you mentioned you might have mentioned that you might be looking to present some more of the biomarker data, perhaps at a conference later in 2021. Are you still on track for that, or is this something we should expect more in 2022?
We didn't disclose when exactly we'll present the data. I can only comment that we are actively and aggressively pursuing sample acquisition and correlation, and then we'll present the data in the future. Ideally, we would like to present it in scientific conferences. We still didn't disclose when.
Got it. Okay. And then maybe just to tag on to Rennie's question about biz dev, but maybe approach from the other angle. So given that Bristol may have acquired an asset that could have maybe some activity on PVRIG through their Agenus bispecific antibody deal, I just want to get an idea of how involved and committed they are to doing the kind of data exploration with you, or is it something that you are controlling?
So few things. Indeed, this licensing involved the TIGIT bispecific. The identity of the second arm is not known, and it could be various other targets. So just to make sure that it is recognized as a product opportunity, a separate product opportunity than TIGIT. Having said that, I think it is pointing to the increased interest of BMS in the TIGIT space, and that's the only thing that I'll say on the behalf of BMS, because obviously that's their decision making and priorities. I will tell you that, and you know, it's facts in the public domain. BMS is doing studies with their own TIGIT that is part of our studies as well, but they are having studies conducted on their own with their own TIGIT, and they are committed to the collaboration with us. We're sponsoring, obviously, the study, the triplet study, and pushing forward, and that's critical for us because COM701 is a leading program in our pipeline, and we want to push it forward and to have the leadership on the execution. But at the end of the day, there is investment on this program, on the TIGIT, and no competition with the bispecific.
Got it. Thanks for taking my question, guys.
The next question is from Dana Graybosch of SVB Leerink. Please go ahead.
Hi. A couple questions for me. First, on the triplet, I wonder if you can clarify what cohorts you're starting to enroll in the expansion. I think initially you had planned to enroll a tumor agnostic based on PVRL2 expression. But with Eran's comments just now, I wonder if you wouldn't be ready to start to enroll that patient set yet. And so could you just clarify exactly which ones you start to enroll and if you'll bring on other cohorts over time? And then with that, how much is BMS involved in making these clinical development strategic decisions?
Yeah, Dina, thank you very much for your question. So for the second part of the question, I'll defer to Anat to answer. For the first part of the question, as you recall, for the expansion cohort, we have a cohort of patients with ovarian cancer. So that includes patients with fallopian tube cancer, that includes patients with primary peritoneal cancer, and patients with epithelial ovarian cancer. The other cohort of patients in the expansion cohort are patients with relapsed endometrial cancer. So those cohorts are open to enrollment, and those are the ones that we're currently exploring right now.
And Dana, for your question about decision making, we're making joint decisions with Bristol Myers Squibb. Obviously, we're leading this program. We're looking at every bit and piece in this program, but we're making decisions in good collaboration with the Bristol Myers Squibb. We have very good relationship. We keep an open line of communication, and we're making decisions that are good for the program together. So this is how this collaboration is being conducted.
And then, so I understand that you have ovarian and endometrial open. If I recall correctly, you had planned other cohorts in the expansion. Will those follow, or is this reflecting some strategic change as you've seen the dose escalation data?
Oh, no. There's no strategic change. Oh, sorry, Henry. Do you want to take it?
No, go ahead, and I can clarify
Okay.
if there any.
No, there's no strategic change. As we stated as Henry said, in the ovarian, we decided that due to the low response rate and the historical data that we have, we can continue to relate to historical data and will not do the randomization. We will add the head and neck as an inflamed tumor type to this, and we'll continue with the with the endometrial that was planned in advance. So these are three changes. With respect to the basket arm that we planned to do, this is still in planning. What we were saying is that we're continuing to collect data that will continue to correlate the PVRIG pathway with the treatment response. And when we will have the data that can allow us to define the cutoff for enrollment, we will start this basket arm. So there's no change in plans on this front.
Perfect. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
And then one more from me on TIGIT. I think that you guys, starting back in 2009, have had your hands on a lot of different TIGIT antibodies. I think you had a whole panel in your initial paper, and of course you work with the BMS TIGIT as well as COM902. And you note the potential differentiating element of COM902 is its very high affinity. As you've worked with all these different TIGIT antibodies, have you noted any other potential differentiating elements? And I guess I'm asking the question, I wonder, as we see your dose escalation data, you'll be the first Fc-silent TIGIT, and if you expect anything preclinically to show up clinically, and what might we look for as we see this data in the second half or in the fourth quarter?
So, yes, we did a comparison of COM902 compared to most of the leading TIGIT antibodies. What we saw that indeed COM902 has a higher affinity, higher binding to effector T cells, and as good or better activity in actual functional assay. So I don't believe we saw any major differences between the other antibodies, but yes, COM902 is a bit superior in this regard. I would say that it's difficult to say at this stage if any of this will translate to clinical observations. Yes, potentially in terms of dosing and PK. In terms of efficacy, it will be difficult to say if there is going to be any difference from the other TIGIT assets that we've seen until now.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is from Stephen Willey of Stifel. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for taking the questions. Maybe just to follow up on the Bristol collaborative question, is your ability to, I guess, pursue a triplet regimen, whether it's, I guess, either with or without Nivo, using your TIGIT, COM902, is that somehow constrained by the existing Bristol collaboration? I'm just kind of curious if you see an interesting signal emerging out of the triplet, how quickly can you start to think about swapping in 902 for the Bristol TIGIT?
So COM902 is totally unrelated to the Bristol collaboration. This is an independent asset. Discussing the triplet, it's a little bit more complicated because under the collaboration that we have with Bristol Myers Squibb, there is an exclusivity for COM701 plus PD-1 inhibitors for a fixed period of time. So we will need to take this into consideration. But COM902 is totally unrelated to the collaboration with Bristol Myers Squibb.
Okay, so I guess your ability to pursue a triplet that would include COM701, COM902, and a PD-1 inhibitor would overlap with the fact that you have exclusivity to Nivo tethered to COM701. Is that the correct way to think about it?
There are some ways for us to do it with marketed PD-1 inhibitors, so that could be done.
Okay. And then I guess, you've talked on the biomarker side about doing this, I guess, retrospective look, whether it's a function of evaluating PVRIG expression in the tumor microenvironment and or PVRL2, I guess, on various immune cell subsets. I know that Roche had kind of previously commented, I think, in one of their TIGIT presentations that they didn't believe that, PVR, which is I guess one of the TIGIT ligands, wasn't a great surrogate biomarker in the sense that it's kind of broadly expressed on a variety of different cell types. Is PVRL2 akin to PVR in the sense that it has that same broad pattern of expression?
So PVR and PVRL2 in a way have a similar pattern of expression in terms that do have expression also in normal tissues, but both of them are upregulated in tumor microenvironment and are not, in some tumors you can find higher PVRL2 and some higher PVR. I think that for PVR, actually there's also some publication, maybe due to its role also in enhancing other mechanisms for tumor invasive, etc. It was published also in addition to genetic data in relation to other trials, not specifically TIGIT, that it correlates with worse prognosis. So yes, what Genentech have shown for PVR, that in non-small cell lung cancer, they didn't seem to have correlation to use it as a biomarker. It doesn't suggest a lot about PVRL2, and we'll need to, and we are validating it ourselves. So we don't know, but there are reasons to think why PVRL2 will be different than PVR.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks for taking the questions.
The next question is from Tony Butler of Roth Capital. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Three brief questions, and let me just state them because they all relate to one another. In clinicaltrials.gov on the triple, you've made some comments today regarding the basket cohort or that of cohort 3. So am I to understand that yet the notion of what defines high expression PVRL2 is not yet known? That's question one. And if it is, any color would be great. Number two is, does PVRL2 high correlate with PDL1 being positive or negative? And I guess a similar question may be, are there tumors that are actually negative with respect to both markers? And then thirdly, and this goes back to the SITC presentation, which was quite helpful, but is there, and this is a question that I think I hear a lot, and it's never clear to me if there's a true correlation, but do peripheral effector memory CD8s and even NKTs, are they actually able to be found in the periphery equal to that of which is found intratumorally? That is to say, is there a direct correlation such that you don't really need the biopsy or may not need it in the future? Thank you very much.
So for the first question, so what is high PVRL2? So this is exactly what we're looking at. To define what is the cutoff. Is it an H score of 100 or 200 or a percentage of immune cells expressing PVRL2 or other DNAM axis members? What is the cutoff that determines and correlates best with response? So this will be determined retrospectively and then tested clinically prospectively. This is for the question of what is high PVRL2. About PVRL2 versus PDL1, so this is a very important question. And PVRL2, in contrast to PDL1, is not induced by inflammation. And therefore, you can find high PVRL2 in PDL1 positive, but also in PDL1 negative tumor types. And that's why we pre-identified, for example, ovarian and endometrial and other tumor types, which, at least in some of them, the expression of PDL1 is not very high. The response to PD1 is not very high. But PVRL2 and in general, the PVRIG pathway is very dominant there. And that's why we're trying to attack these kind of tumor types. About effector memory and NKT, so the correlation between effector memory cells proliferating in periphery and specific effector clones proliferating inside tumor microenvironment exists. I wouldn't say that we and the entire scientific community is in a place that we can rely solely on peripheral measurements, and that's why we have paired biopsies in the expansion course of our trials to look inside the tumor microenvironment. But there is a correlation, and in many cases you see specific clones that are proliferating peripherally, and they're also expand inside tumor microenvironment. NKT, you can find a bit less of those in tumor microenvironment, but there are studies to show that when they are present, they are correlated to mostly to good prognosis. The correlation between peripheral and intratumoral expansion of NKT, I wouldn't believe it was investigated much, or at least I'm not aware of any studies to correlate that. But just to mention, in addition to what it reflects about the tumor microenvironment, this kind of enhanced proliferation also supports that the drug COM701 is active, and it does, again, this is preliminary data, but what it suggests that it does what you think it should do. It's enhanced immune cells activity, enhanced interferon gamma, so this is another surrogate marker for drug activity in addition to the direct correlation to what is happening in tumor microenvironments. And maybe just to add that this is why maybe in many cases, also for other drugs, when you, especially in early trials with heavily pretreated patients, you can find these kind of pharmacodynamic changes in the tumor, in the periphery, and they're not always correlated to response.
Thank you. One follow-up, if I may, though. This is back to the second part of PVRL2 and PD-L1. But if you were able, post-therapy, if in fact you actually drive PD-L1 expression, even in PD-L1 minus tumors, when you look at a tumor initially, having been treated with something else, that is in fact relapse or a relapse patient or a resistant patient, a PD-L1 minus patient that in fact been treated with COM701, for example, would drive PD-L1 expression. Is that true?
Could happen. If indeed, and as mentioned before, the biology of PVRIG and PVRL2, and if we will be able to drive and expand T cell tumor microenvironment, then potentially will increase the inflammatory status of tumor microenvironment, and then potentially PD-L1 could be upregulated as well as a marker to indicate. And again, this is one of the reasons PD-L1 is a biomarker for PD-L1 activity, because it reflects that the TME now is more inflamed and has more T cells inside.
Exactly, and thank you very much.
This concludes our Q&A sessions. I will now turn the call back to Compugen's President and CEO, Dr. Cohen Dayag. Would you like to make your concluding statement?
Thank you. To conclude, we're excited about what's to come and are proud of our remarkable progress. As always, we will seek to continue to drive the science to uncover important insights into the biology and mechanism of our candidates. And we remain uniquely positioned to unlock the promise of these potentially foundational immunotherapy candidates in the clinic across patient populations typically considered unresponsive to current treatments. Thank you for joining us today and your continued support. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. This concludes Compugen Ltd. Second Quarter 2021 Financial Results Conference Call. Thank you for your participation. You may go ahead and disconnect.